My name is Bella Hadid, and I'm an artist. Not the gallery-hopping, wine-sipping kind you picture in downtown studios. No. I work at a small charity center tucked away in one of the forgotten corners of the city. My days are spent painting with kids who've lived through more than most adults ever should. Kids whose eyes carry stories they don't yet have words for. And somehow in that chaos of paint splatters and broken crayons, I see magic every single day. I've always believed that art can heal, that it can speak when words fall short. And every time I see one of those children smile, really smile, because of something they created with their own hands, I know I'm right. At home, though, it's a different story. I live with my husband, Mark. He's a sales manager, always glued to his phone, chasing one deal after another like it's oxygen. And then there's his mother, Martha. She moved in a year ago after a fall she never quite recovered from. And let me tell you, the woman never met an opinion she didn't say out loud, loudly. Our house? It's chaos in its own right. Mark shouting over calls, Martha blasting her TV shows. There's no peace, not even when I sneak into the kitchen at night to grab a glass of water. But I've learned to find peace in other places, in the faces of those children, in the smell of fresh acrylic paint, in the soft rustle of brushes against canvas. One evening, while dicing vegetables for dinner, I decided to share something special. Martha, I began, trying to keep my voice bright. I submitted some of my paintings to the citywide art contest, and I also submitted some of the kids' work. I paused for effect. The prize is $100,000. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. That's nice, Bella. But let's be real. What are the odds? Martha snorted from her recliner. Those street kids and their doodles? You're dreaming, dear. I blinked. It's not just about the prize. It's about showing the world what these kids can do. Their stories matter. Their art. Mark cut me off. Bella, why don't you get a real job, something that actually pays? I looked down at the half-chopped carrots on the board, my hand tightening around the knife. This job is real to me, I said quietly, and it pays enough. We have food, we pay the bills. Martha waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. We need real money, Bella, not coloring books and dreams. Dinner finished in silence. I didn't argue. I was too tired. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, who was still scrolling mindlessly through his phone, I felt like I was screaming into a storm, my voice lost in the thunder of their indifference. I believed in what I did, believed in those children and the stories they painted. This contest, it was more than a chance at money. It was a chance to prove that our work mattered. As I drifted to sleep, I pictured the center, its messy, joy-filled chaos. Tomorrow, I'd return to that sanctuary. There, I mattered. There, the kids didn't ask if I made enough money or if my work was real. They just painted, laughed, and healed. And I was part of that. The days at the charity center were like breathing fresh air after being underwater. The kids ran to greet me, arms full of sketches and bright smiles. Every day was a new story. Murals on the walls, messy finger painting sessions, and that one shy little boy, Timmy, who finally dared to paint his first son. I'll never forget that day. He had never touched a brush before, always watching from the sidelines. But something changed. That afternoon, he picked up a thick brush, dipped it in bright yellow paint, and painted a sun so big and radiant that it lit up the entire wall, and my heart. His smile, when he stepped back to admire his work, it outshone the sun he'd painted. That was the moment I lived for. I snapped a photo of the mural, my hands still smudged with paint, and that evening when I got home, I showed it to Mark. Look, I said, holding my phone out. Timmy painted this, his first ever. Mark barely looked up. That's cute, but it's just a kid's drawing, Bella. It's not just a drawing, I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. It's a breakthrough. He's been through so much. Martha chimed in from her throne of judgment. Bella, when are you going to stop playing therapist with a paintbrush? You're not saving lives. It's a kid's picture, that's all. I froze, the joy of my day shriveling like a flower in winter. It's not playing, I said, voice trembling. These kids, they find a voice through their art. They heal. Mark let out a long sigh. Healing won't pay the mortgage, Bella. We need a real job, a real plan. Something cracked in me then. I clenched my fists under the table. This is a real job, and it does make a difference. Martha laughed. What difference? I'm ashamed to tell my friends where you work. You need to wake up. And just like that, I was reminded how far apart my two worlds were. At the center, I was Bella, the artist who helped kids smile again. At home, I was Bella, the dreamer with a useless job. That night, I sat alone in my studio, staring at a blank canvas. The words from earlier played in my head like a broken record. I dipped my brush in color and began to paint. Not for them, for me. Each stroke was a silent scream, a splash of defiance. The world they wanted me to live in was dull and gray. But mine was full of color, even if they never saw it. The charity center had become my second home, the only place where I truly felt understood. The air was filled with the scent of paint, the laughter of children, and the silent echoes of stories that were too painful to speak aloud. In those tiny moments, when a child's hand stopped shaking long enough to color in a shape, or when someone smiled after finishing their first drawing, I found my reason for getting out of bed every morning. One Thursday afternoon, while cleaning up after a messy watercolor session, my phone buzzed on the paint-streaked table. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello, Bella Hadid speaking." "Miss Hadid, this is John Harris from the City Arts Council. I'm calling to offer you my warmest congratulations. You've won the citywide art contest. The prize is $100,000. I stood there frozen, sponge dripping in my hand, the scent of acrylic paint hanging in the air. I won?" "Yes," John replied, his voice warm and proud. "Your submission stood out. Not just your work, but the children's pieces as well. We'd also love to speak with you about a potential collaboration with the city's public art initiative." I barely heard the rest. A wave of disbelief, joy, and a strange numbness washed over me. I thanked him, trying to sound professional, but my voice trembled. When I told the kids, the room erupted in cheers. They clapped, hugged me, danced in their seats. Some even cried. That moment, it wasn't about the prize. It was about validation. That their work, their pain, their joy, it all meant something. Later, I sat with Lisa, the center's psychologist, nursing a cup of tea in the break room. "They never believed in any of this," I admitted. "Mark and Martha always told me this job was useless, that the art was silly. What if they only see the money now?" Lisa gave me a long, thoughtful look. "Then maybe it's time to test that. Don't tell them right away. Let them reveal who they really are when they think there's nothing to gain." Her words struck something deep in me. At home, I'd been belittled, mocked, and dismissed for what I loved. Now I had the chance to see if that changed only because of a dollar sign. That night, I went home and said nothing. I moved through the house like a ghost. Martha watched her shows. Mark talked on the phone about a new client. They didn't even notice the smile I couldn't hide or the subtle excitement in my step. In bed, I stared at the ceiling. I wanted to believe that Mark loved me for me, that he respected my work even if he didn't understand it. But deep down, I was scared. Scared that the prize money would flip a switch. Not in a good way, but in a greedy, ugly way. So I waited. 2 days passed. I watched them, observed. And then I chose my moment. That Sunday over dinner, I finally said, "I've made a decision. I'm donating the entire prize money to the charity center." Mark froze. His fork hovered midair before clattering against the plate. "What?" Martha dropped her glass, red wine spilling like blood across the tablecloth. "You're doing what?" she shrieked. "Are you insane? That's our future, our new car, our new kitchen, everything." "It's not our money," I said evenly. "It's mine, and I know where it belongs." Mark's face flushed with fury. "You've lost your mind, Bella. That money could have changed our lives." "It already has," I replied, "just not the way you expected." The silence that followed was thunderous. "You always played the saint," Martha hissed. "But this is stupidity wrapped in arrogance. You could finally give us something useful, and you throw it away on a bunch of street rats?" I stood up slowly, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "Those street rats have more soul in their fingertips than you two have in your entire beings." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "You've crossed a line, Bella. You've embarrassed me for the last time. I want a divorce." There it was, clear as day. Not about love, not about loyalty, about money. And my refusal to give it to them had ripped off their masks. "I figured you might," I said quietly. He stormed off, and I was left in the kitchen with Martha fuming silently across from me. I walked away, climbed the stairs, and sat in the dark of my studio. My heart hurt. Of course it did. No one walks away from a marriage without some ache. But with that ache came something else. Clarity. The next morning, the silence was heavier than usual. Martha avoided my eyes. Mark barely spoke. I began packing a small suitcase. Mark saw me from the hallway. "So that's it? You're really walking away?" I looked at him, his once familiar face now a stranger's mask. "You already did, when you showed me what mattered to you. "You're going to live off paint and kids' doodles?" he sneered. "No," I said. "I'm going to live off truth, something we stopped sharing a long time ago." He didn't stop me, didn't follow me, didn't beg. He just let the door close behind me. And you know what? That sound, the click of that door shutting, wasn't an end. It was the beginning of everything. Walking away from that house felt like stepping out of a cage. The morning air hit my face like a splash of truth. It was cold, crisp, and terrifyingly honest. I didn't cry, not right away. My hands were too full with the suitcase, and my heart too full with relief. That house, once my sanctuary, had become a museum of disappointment. The halls echoed not with memories of love, but with sharp remarks and muffled contempt. The taxi driver didn't ask questions. He just turned up the radio, and the city outside the window moved on, unaware that a woman had just left a whole life behind. I found a small apartment across town, tucked above a flower shop. It wasn't big, but it was mine. The kitchen windows looked out onto rooftops dotted with antennas and pigeons. The paint on the walls peeled slightly at the edges, but it had soul. I unpacked my brushes first, placing them by the window. Then came the canvases, some blank, others half-finished. Silent witnesses to a life in transition. The days after the divorce moved slowly, like wet paint refusing to dry. I signed the papers at a dull office downtown. Mark was there, so was Martha. Their eyes didn't hold rage anymore, only resentment, disappointment, maybe even confusion. I was supposed to break down. I was supposed to come crawling back. But I didn't. Martha couldn't resist one last jab. "How will you survive on your pathetic little salary?" she spat. I smiled, calm, cool, collected. "You know," I said softly, "I was just testing you." Mark's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I never donated all the prize money," I said. "It was a test, to see who you both really were when you thought I had nothing left to give." Martha's mouth fell open. Mark looked like he'd been slapped. "I have projects lined up now, city-sponsored murals, gallery invites, commissions. I'm going to be more than fine." For the first time in forever, I saw silence shut both of them up. Mark tried to backpedal. "Bella, I didn't mean what I said. Maybe we could—" "No," I interrupted. "You showed me who you are, and I finally believe you." And with that, I walked out. No yelling, no drama, just the soft sound of my boots against the hallway tiles and the rush of freedom waiting on the other side. The next few months were like breathing for the first time. I poured myself into my art. I collaborated with the city on a mural project near the Children's Hospital. They wanted bright, hopeful images. I gave them sprawling fields of sunflowers, soaring birds, and smiling children drawn from the sketches my little ones had done back at the center. Word spread fast. Local newspapers wrote about me, the artist who worked with street kids and turned their pain into hope. I was invited to speak at events, to host workshops, even to feature in a local art magazine. Me, Bella Hadid. The woman who used to be told her work was worthless now had her paintings framed in gallery windows. But even with the spotlight growing brighter, I never left the center. Every week I returned, brushes in hand, paint on my sleeves, and stories in my heart. The kids waited for me like they always did, with excitement, with love. They didn't care how many articles I was in or how much money I had. They only cared that I showed up. And I always did. Timmy, the boy who painted the sun, now taught the younger kids how to mix colors. He wore a little apron and told jokes while teaching brush techniques. Seeing him like that, it reminded me why I'd started this path in the first place. In my little apartment, I found a rhythm. Mornings with coffee and canvas, afternoons at the center, evenings curled up by the window, watching the city lights blink like stars that never slept. Sometimes I'd get messages from Mark. Long paragraphs, apologies, please, promises. I read them with the kind of detachment you feel reading a story you've already closed the book on. He was part of my past. A chapter filled with lessons, yes, but not a chapter I needed to reopen. One evening, as I stood on a ladder, finishing the last strokes of a mural outside a youth shelter, a woman approached me. "Are you Bella Hadid?" I turned, brush still in hand. "Yes." "I just wanted to thank you," she said, voice trembling. "My daughter goes to the center you work at. She doesn't talk much, not to me, not to anyone. But she brings home her paintings. She talks about you, about how painting helps her feel things again." I didn't know what to say, so I hugged her, tightly, And when she walked away, I looked up at the painting on the wall. It was a pair of wings, colorful, wild, and soaring skyward. Not every day was easy. There were still mornings when I woke up with tears in my eyes. Ghosts of words spoken in anger still lingered. But now I had something stronger, proof that those ghosts couldn't hold me down anymore. I was building something. With each brushstroke, each child's smile, each mural finished, I was creating a life that reflected who I really was, one filled with joy, purpose, and fierce independence. And I wasn't done, not even close. Spring arrived quietly, painting the city in soft greens and golds. The streets bloomed with color, and in many ways so did I. My world had changed, not all at once, not like flipping a switch, but slowly, like watching dawn chase away the night. People often ask me now what it feels like, to go from being overlooked to being recognized, from being silenced to being heard, from surviving to thriving. And the truth is, it feels like breathing with your whole chest after holding it in for far too long. The apartment above the flower shop became a sanctuary. Its walls were no longer just painted surfaces. They were living journals, covered with children's artwork, memories of days that had shaped me, and pieces of my own that told stories I no longer had to keep quiet. There was one painting above my bed, though, that meant the most to me. A field of sunflowers under a sky streaked with gold and violet. It was one I had painted just days after leaving Mark. I called it Beginning Again. As my recognition grew, so did the opportunities. The city offered me a full-time role directing youth art programs. Schools started asking me to run weekend art therapy workshops. One local university even asked me to speak about the intersection of trauma and creativity. Me, Bella Hadid, who used to be told that her job wasn't real. And I said yes to every new door that opened, because for too long I had said no to myself. One Sunday morning, I was sipping tea by the window when my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from a museum curator in New York. They had seen a feature about my murals and wanted to include my work in an upcoming exhibit focused on healing through art. I sat there for a full minute, blinking at the screen. Then I laughed. A soft, breathless laugh that turned into tears, not sad ones, the kind that come when life surprises you with something beautiful you never thought you'd deserve. That weekend, I told the kids at the center. They clapped like I'd won the lottery. One of the younger girls, Mia, hugged me tight and said, "You're famous now, Miss Bella." I chuckled. "Not famous, sweetheart, just finally being seen." Evenings were my favorite time. After the noise of the day faded and the world grew quiet, I would sit in front of a blank canvas and just let my thoughts pour out in color. Sometimes it was joy, sometimes it was pain, but it was always real. One night, as I walked home from the center, arms filled with donated art supplies, I passed the mural Timmy had helped paint months ago. It was still vibrant, maybe even more beautiful now that time had passed. I stopped to look at it. The giant sun he had painted still stretched across the wall, its rays like open arms. And I thought about how far we had come. Timmy, once too scared to speak, now leading art circles. Mia, who used to flinch at every loud sound, now giggling with her friends as they painted rainbows. And me, once silenced by doubt and the opinions of others, now standing in the middle of my truth, finally proud of who I was. A week later, I hosted a community event at the center. It was the first time we'd opened our doors to the public. Families came. Teachers, artists, even city officials. The children proudly showed their art, telling their stories, their voices loud and clear. I watched them beam with pride. They weren't just students. They were creators, survivors, artists. At the end of the event, as people began to leave, an older woman approached me. Her hair was silver, and her eyes were soft but sharp. "You remind me of someone I once knew," she said. "A girl who wanted to change the world with paint and paper." "What happened to her?" I asked. "She stopped believing it was possible," she said. "But you make me think she was wrong." We stood there for a moment, two strangers bound by unspoken truths. That night, as I washed brushes and packed up art supplies, I realized something. My story, this journey, it wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who was ever told she wasn't enough. Every artist who was ever told their work didn't matter. Every dreamer who was told to grow up and be realistic. I had believed them once, but not anymore. Now I believed in color, in resilience, in the quiet power of a single brushstroke, and in myself. When I walked home, the city was glowing. not just from the streetlights, but from something deeper. A warmth that came from knowing who you are and standing in it, unapologetically. I made a promise to myself that night. I would never again shrink for the comfort of others. I would never again let someone else's fear define the size of my dreams. I would create, love, and live loudly, even if it made others uncomfortable, especially if it did. Because this life, it's mine now, and it's just getting started.